Michelle. Oh, good. Michelle, you can hear me. Perfect. All right. So looks like we have a bit of a small group, but I imagine that some other people are going to pop in after the school day ends. So once again, we're really happy to welcome back Dean Shareski, who did a really fantastic session yesterday. So I'm sure that you will all learn a lot today. And Dean is the community manager for Discovery Education Canada. He is also a former teacher who used to work with the Prairie South School Division out in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And he's done a lot of work with presentations and speaking about educational technology and bringing it into the classroom, and including working with pre-service teachers as a sessional instructor at the University of Regina. So Dean has a whole lot to share with us, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Do you mind giving me moderator privileges? That way I can move my slides over. So that would be great. Thanks for everybody for coming and participating in the MOOC. I don't know how many of the sessions you've attended or what you've been learning, but again, I think it's just a fantastic opportunity for people to learn in somewhat informal but certainly open ways and connect to some important ideas. And I hope that's something that you'll be able to take with you today as I share a little bit about my experience and my beliefs about the way learning should look, and being really intentional, I suppose, about the idea of making learning social. So yeah, my background is the fact that I was a classroom teacher for 14 years, pretty well K-8 across the board. Worked at a district for about 9 years in a supporting role at central office, and then for the past 2.5 years I've been working with Discovery Education, traveling across Canada and the U.S., working with a lot of different schools, a lot of different districts, and really have continued to open my eyes to two things. One, how unique and different people's approach to teaching and learning is, and learning lots about various perspectives and approaches, but also at the same time realizing how similar we all are in many respects. So it's been that interesting perspective to view from both sides of that. So fortunate to do that, and excited to be able to share a little bit about the things I've seen, and in this case more of the things I've done around the idea of social learning. You can contact me in a number of ways through my portal. There you can find all the spaces I reside, a Twitter address as well. And it's just actually an image of teaching a number of years ago at the University of Regina, where I continued to teach probably 2 to 3 semesters per year as a sessional instructor, and have really had some of my or I should say, it's been a great way to practice many of the ideas that I have, certainly researched and explored, and being able to implement and see kind of what does work and what does really matter moving forward, given all of the wonderful affordances that we have available to us. Just a quick story of kind of reflects not only my experiences, but I guess my beliefs around having an opportunity to connect with great people. And you can see that URL there, I'll throw in the chat room, is sort of a summary of a story of what happened to me about 2 months ago. I turned a great age of 50. It's a wonderful age. A lot of really cool things happen to you. The government sends you a package that you have to send away, looking at you have to send a stool sample to the government when you turn 50 in Saskatchewan, so they can find out how long you're going to live or something. Anyways, that along with a whole bunch of other glorious things about this half century of living. But the really neat story, the really fun story was I was away actually on my birthday, and on that day and about a week after, all these packages started arriving that you can see on the left-hand side there, and my wife was sending me pictures of these packages. I didn't know what was in them at first, and came home to find that people from around the world had sort of come together as a result of actually Alec Koros and another teacher from British Columbia who organized this and sent me socks for my birthday. And so I had over 89 pairs of socks from people, and it was kind of a really neat testament, I guess, to people who have participated in my learning and in my life in all kinds of different ways. Some people I've met, some people I have never met in my life, but somehow wanted to share that connection with me. So again, it was just a really neat story of being connected, really, which I think, as we talk about this notion of social, we use the word social media a lot. I think sometimes it's easy to forget. We talk about it in education circles a lot, and we talk about the educational side of it, but we sometimes can forget this element of social that really is about people and connecting with one another, not just because we're educators, not just because we share some commonalities in that respect, but because we're human beings and we share bits of our lives together in ways that we've never done before, which, for people who've never experienced that's really strange, and it's difficult. If you're one of those people who've had some of these experiences and you try to explain it to somebody else, it's not easy. And if I'm telling you this story and the story sounds strange to you, it may be because you haven't had that experience of connecting with people at that level, but it really does. It really is a new experience for many of us, for all of us, really, that we've never had a chance to connect with people from all over the world. But it's truly, kind of transformed the way I think because of these new perspectives and these new people that support and help the work I do. So as I think about the role of technology in schools, I think there's a number of sort of big, hairy questions, I would say, that we have to address, and I think these are the questions that schools are being asked right now, that education is being challenged with, and we're really in the midst of trying to sort that out. And the idea here from this book, The Future of Learning Institutions in a Digital Age, talks about the fact that the world around us has changed in all these ways, and yet here we are in education, and many times learning, we're acting as if none of this has gone on because of the ways in which we continue to forge ahead with systems, more in the most part, that have been going on now for decades. And it's a really interesting time because while that remains relatively true, we're starting to see these things start to shift, and the disruptions around technology happening probably more so in individual classrooms, maybe a little bit at the school level, not so much at district and larger bodies, just because it's really difficult and really challenging. So I think the hope is, and I think the real the way in which I think we'll see things change is still remains at that sort of small classroom level. So that's kind of where I think we're seeing a lot of the change, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting things happen because it's a manageable thing. Changing all of our learning institutions and the way in which we approach education is really, really challenging. So for me, my journey into rethinking the way that teaching and learning happens from a really personal level sort of began about 7 years ago when I began teaching again. Given in 2002 was my last year as a classroom teacher. And if you think the difference between 2002 and 2007 is fairly striking, in that 2002 this is pre-social media. There really wasn't much. In 2002, I wasn't blogging. I don't even know that I knew what a blog was in 2002. So my extensive experience at that point with a teacher was pretty well just learning how to create a web page with things like Dreamweaver and those kinds of tools that we now look at as fairly archaic in some respects, and just the ability to have a digital camera, let alone figuring out what to do with it, was really the early stages of a lot of educational technology. And so from that point, I took my role in the classroom, but it wasn't until 2007 that I began teaching a course at the University of Regina, and I teach those two courses primarily over the last 7 years, where I really had the opportunity to incorporate a lot of the tools into my teaching. And the first course that I taught happened to be a purely online course, and since then I've taught a fair number of those, but in between, not all those courses were online, but this one was. And so about a month before the course was to begin, I got an email from a student asking this question: can you send me all the assignments ahead of time? And that's a fair question. It's a very fair question, because the idea for a lot of people taking distance courses was the fact that they weren't bound by time constraints quite as much, and in many cases their experiences with online was essentially a holdover from correspondence courses, pre-digital, which were essentially mailed out assignments and resources, and then you mail them back, and you got your mark, and this was sort of the exchange. And it was all, again, done under convenience of time and space. And so, someone asking this question was not uncommon, and I know a lot of institutions were quite comfortable with listing all their assignments and then having kids or adults, whomever, complete them even before the course date started. And so, as soon as that course opened, you click the submit button, and all of your assignments were done. So when the question was asked, I thought, well, I understand why you're saying it, but at the same time, not having taught the course before, I hadn't really thought through what I wanted. I realized pretty quickly as I was forced to think about it that I didn't want that to happen. So my response to the student was no, because what I want to have happen through this course, and I think one of the powerful affordances of a classroom and of a community, is the fact that we can learn with and from each other. And again, part of the thinking that remains and is still evident in lots of students is this mind your own business mindset of learning, that I do work, I hand it into a teacher, that I get feedback, and it goes back and forth this way, and you keep your eyes on your own paper. You don't talk to your neighbor. All of those things, for many of our students, is the way they think about school. That's what school is. You're not there to visit with your friend. You're not there to talk to your neighbor. I mean, occasionally you may get an opportunity to do some sort of group project, or maybe we'll, a special occasion, we'll rearrange the classroom to have some sort of a discussion forum, if you will, but not really the predominant way to think about school. So this is something we're still trying to have to overcome, that idea. And as Dave Weinberger says, that knowledge it's between us. It isn't in our heads, and that social knowing is never finished. And Dave Weinberger has been fairly influential in a lot of my thinking about again, the affordance of all the information, the access to information that we have, and thinking very differently about the fact, even when we think about the internet. I mean, there's still a lot of folks who perceive the internet as just sort of a place where there's a lot of stuff, a place to get information. That's where I go to get information. And while that's true, I've argued that I think you're missing out if that's the way you view it, and that there's the idea that people are there, people reside there, and events like this happen where you aren't just listening and hearing information. You have an opportunity to exchange ideas and have conversations, as you do on many of the social sites. And you could certainly argue that the web, predominantly the web that people are active in, are all social spaces, whether you're talking about YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. Most of those spaces have a social component where you can leave feedback and you can engage in conversation. And much more so, I think, than the vast access to information, it's that ability to exchange ideas. And that idea itself shouldn't be restricted to the web for sure. And I think about, whoa, wait a minute. If that's true online, why isn't that true in our classrooms? So let's play a little, just a little game here to illustrate my point. So I've got 6 pictures here on the board. I want you to look at all 6 of them, and I want you to just to write a number in the chat box of how many of these do you think you know the answer to. So of the 6 that you see here, how many, from 0 to 6, how many of these do you know or think you know who they are or what they are? Again, type. Carl says 1. Michelle thinks she knows 2. Andrew thinks he may know 3. Now it'll be interesting because now we have 6 potential correct answers, whether they're all different or whether there's overlap there. Joanna thinks she may know 3 as well, although Joanna would have to be cheating because since she was here yesterday, she probably knows many more than 3, but all right. Thank you for that. So, all right, so we have this, whatever, we have this range of things. So, yeah, I know. So, so let's see what we do actually know together, because according to this, if we're actually correct, and Andrew does know 3, we should at least collectively know 3. But given the fact that Michelle and Carola each know 2, think they know 2 and 1, perhaps we know more than that. But let's find out. So, yeah, I know you can cheat, and I guess you could. So, woman in the top left. Who do we have there? Anybody know who that one is? I'll give that one to you, Carola. It's Condoleezza Rice. Let's move over to the, yes, boy, now we're getting even specific. Well done. The couple in the top middle. Any thoughts on that? A small group. It could be a niche group of people. I don't know if anybody knows them. We don't know them, so let's call them, they're the figure skaters from the U.S. that had a lot of, there you go, Michelle. See, Michelle knew the figure skaters, very good. Meryl Davis and Charlie White. The gentleman on the top right. We have no clue. Interesting figure. I don't know if he's rich. So this is Julian Assange. He is the WikiLeaks guy, the guy that got in big trouble for the WikiLeaks site and leaked all kinds of government documents and so forth. Bottom left, probably not that rich. Bottom left, does he look familiar? Oh, Andrew, well done. Adam Savage of the Mythbusters. This is sort of this is the Discovery Education plug. Mythbusters is one of our great programming that we offer for classrooms and so forth. So yeah, there's the Mythbusters guy. The bottom middle. Very good. Krypton, the symbol for Krypton. And the bottom right. Now the bottom right might be a little bit difficult. Maybe not. Maybe some of you knows. Maybe Andrew has a guess. Andrew looks like he might be typing something, but I don't know. Any guesses? Could be a tough one. Yeah, because that is my mother-in-law. So you may know this story already, Andrew. You may have played this game before. So that one would have been a harder one to play. But you know, the point being that even with, I think we actually, even without going into Julian Assange, we actually knew 4 of the 6. And so again, to illustrate the idea that you know, the smartest person in the room is the room, as Dave Weinberger says. And oh, there you go. Oh, it's Andrew Longstaff. Sorry, I didn't know what Andrew L was. There we go. To illustrate the idea that there is collective intelligence, and that sometimes we forget. We just leave out the fact that there's people in our classrooms that bring to the table ideas. They bring to the table background and experiences, that we should be working more at offering opportunities for them to contribute. And again, this is a really simple example. I realize that you know, in a lot of cases it doesn't always work that way, but I think it does illustrate the point that there's people that we can certainly draw from. Exactly, two heads better than one. So you know, and from the idea that we have a classroom system and we could have a community system, and when you think about that statement, you know, and you sort of break it down as the idea, the difference between a classroom and a community really does revolve around that idea that a classroom has, you know, when we think about what makes up a classroom, we think of students, we think of teachers, we probably think of, you know, lots of formal structures and lots of perhaps restrictive ways in which we interact with one another. And yet the idea of community is a very richer, collaborative kind of experience. And so I think we can move beyond that one. And you know, for me, in creating my classroom, this was a statement that one of my students left as a comment in her evaluation a few years ago, saying that I knew people in this class far better than I do people in most of my face-to-face classes. And for me, that was high praise, because that's what essentially I was trying to do. And yet, you know, teaching online, you might think that would be more difficult. And it kind of saddened me to the fact that I think there were, you know, I knew that these students had classes and face-to-face classes where they weren't particularly very large. There may have been 20 or 30 students in them, and they didn't know the person next to them because there was no opportunity to get to know them. And so, you know, it's sort of one of the challenges when you're teaching online, because I tend to go overboard in many respects in trying to create that feeling of community. And I think we could all probably do a better job in working hard to create this idea of community. So in the course that I teach, I share these 5 kind of tenets or beliefs that I have about learning, that I try to reference and include throughout the course of the session the semester or wherever I'm working. Is that learning is social and connected, and that's really important for them to think about that they make connections with one another, that they interact, that it's personal and self-directed, that they have choice, that they get to determine that pathway to some degree, and that their learning should be a shared and transparent experience, because again, you're not going to learn from and with each other if we're not sharing, if we're not transparent in some respect. And then the affordance of technology makes the content a lot richer. The fact that we can be using media, multimedia, in ways we never had before, and that it ought to be joyful, that there ought to be lots of smiles, there ought to be lots of, that learning should be this wonderful experience. And I really, you know, I think some people think, I don't know if you remember the old Buckley's commercial, it tastes awful but it works. I think there's a lot of people that think of learning like Buckley's, that it's supposed to be, you know, arduous. And I continually made, you know, would be annoyed when people would say, yeah, but sometimes learning isn't fun. And they always want to make sure you know that. Well, of course we know that sometimes learning isn't fun. But my argument is it should be way more fun than it is. And it should be a way more enjoyable experience. And so I think that, you know, that's something that I certainly try to aim for in my classroom. And this was actually a couple of weeks ago, the course I'm teaching now, one of my students wrote this. And again, just to continue to for me, again, illustrate the idea that, or reemphasize the idea that this is what I do, is that I didn't want it to feel like an online class, because for a number of the students that I have now, they have taken online courses before, and they haven't been all that interactive. They haven't had all that sense of community and getting to know one another and learning with and from each other. So that was, again, you know, I say those things as really positive feedback for me as well. And again, it doesn't always work that way. You don't always get that response, but that's certainly the goal. So I just want to share with you a couple of really specific things in efforts to build this notion of community in the classroom. And even if it matters, and does it matter if it's face-to-face or online? And I ask that question, or think about that yeah, sometimes I'll pause it for a second, because usually if you get in the chipmunk thing, it's just because your connection is a little bit weak and you're having trouble keeping up. So let me just pause my talking for a second. In fact, while I pause it, I want you to just give me a sense of what it is you teach. What's your teaching situation? All right. So as I'm sharing these things, please be thinking about whether or not these ideas can apply in your context, or where they fit, or how you might riff on them, remix them, or maybe they're not applicable. I don't know. I'm not trying to suggest this is the excuse me, this is the roadmap for this. This is just the specific things I have done with my students to try to help create this. And so given that we have a small enough group, I really would like to see some feedback from you in terms of, hey, this is an idea I could use, or I do something completely different for this. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is about being intentional. The fact that I really think that classrooms should be social, that community is something you should strive for, and with a caveat there, that real, if you're talking about real community in its purest form, I don't know if a classroom ever really gets that, because if you do, it's amazing, but I mean, essentially you're bringing people together that don't have a choice. They're forced to be in this classroom together. They're not choosing to participate in a community like they might if they're, you know, joining a curling club or belonging to a church or something like that. This is kind of a forced community. So I understand those limitations. At the same time, I think there are things that we can do to help foster the notion of community and give students an opportunity to engage in that way. So one of the things that I do, particularly because I know my students are going to have some angst about taking an online course, is I create a movie trailer. So let me just show you what that might look like. I'll fire it up here, and you'll see. I'll play a few minutes, just a minute or two of it. I'll throw that, if you can't hear it, I'll throw that in the chat room as well. It should play for you in just a moment. So that's just, again, a quick thing, and it's a really simple thing. If you've never used iMovie trailers, that's all it is using iMovie and putting in a few clips here and there. And it's not fancy, it's nothing elaborate. It's a little bit corny, a little bit cheesy, but again, the intent is to help students who are transitioning into taking an online course, that here's the person behind that, here's what this is going to like, here's the idea of what you're going to experience. And I was thinking about other kinds of ways to help people get comfortable. And I know there are some school divisions who have the kindergarten teachers spend the first 2 weeks going out into their students' homes and getting to know their students in their homes, getting to know their parents, because they realize that's a big shift going into entering school for the first time, and lots of young, 5-year-old and 6-year-old kids are pretty nervous about that. But I just think about that all throughout. I mean, whether your student's going from grade 3 to grade 4 or middle school to high school or whatever, all of those things are there. And so there's all that uncertainty. What if every teacher created a trailer like that to help welcome their classroom? Here's who we are. And it doesn't have to be that fancy. It could be anything, just saying, hi, my name is so-and-so. Really looking forward to getting to know you this year. Here's some things that I'd like, that I enjoy, just by way of introduction. And I think to give that to them, especially ahead of time, so they get a sense of, oh, I'm looking forward to this. This is something that's going to be interesting. I think that's a really powerful thing. So for me, again, specifically because it's an online course, I think there's more of a need to do that. But I think the idea of a course trailer for all grade levels could be, you might be able to tweak that idea and make that useful for everybody. Specifically when I teach online, I'm not a big fan of the learning management system, the dreaded LMS, mostly because I think they focus too much on the management side and not as much around the learning side. And the analogy that I give when I think of the LMS is it's like when you get a classroom and you're not allowed to move the furniture. The desks are where they are, the teacher's desk where it is, the board is where it is. You know, you're not moving anything, and that could work. I mean, that doesn't say you're out of luck, but it does it really has a restrictive feel, I think, for a lot of people who want to try to make this their own space and make it their own. And I'm actually teaching another course right now for another institution where I am using an LMS, Desire to Learn, which is a fine LMS, and it works really well, and it does what it's supposed to do. But I've had a difficult time, having only taught that course once, really getting, trying to create the same level of community, just because the structure of it is challenging. So that's the only issue I have, because I think at the end of the day, this is what I'm going for. This is what I think all education should be thinking about. And it's challenging, as Stephen Downes says, to move beyond the idea that education is something that's provided for us and something that we create for ourselves. So here you have a learning management system that's provided for the students. Everything's there. You log in. You can upload stuff. You can do whatever. But at the end of the day, that space isn't yours. It's the institutions. It's the schools. So I really like the idea of giving students their own space where they can do what they need to do, where they can showcase their learning. And so for me, that's one thing that I've done right at the beginning, is I've had my students go out and create their own space. And I think when you think about this notion, this might obviously, there's a level of, you know, gradual release of responsibility. You might not obviously do this with kindergarten students, but you can give them some space and give them some ability to create and make it their own. And at some point, they should be able to go ahead and make their own space. And I've had students in the past. This was one of my students who's now teaching high school in St. Louis, Kyle Webb, who and I've had a few of my students do this, and I encourage them to actually go and buy their own domain name. So for $10, he went and bought web.ca and has his own personal web space with a blog and his portfolio and all of that other stuff, but it's his. It doesn't belong to anybody else. So that's something that's really important to think about. Whatever, and that space might be physical spaces as well. So I'm talking digital, but even in your classroom, like where do they have a wall where they can put up their stuff, where they can say, this is the thing I want to share? Because again, traditionally what's happened is teacher has a bulletin board and teacher puts up the stuff, and that's fine. I don't oppose that. I just think there should also be a place and a means and a way for students to share and create what they want to share and what they want to create. So how do we do that? How do we sort of empower our students in that way? Also connecting in multiple ways. Not everything works for everybody. So by having only one way in which you can interact with your teacher or with your classmates can again be restrictive. So my sort of home base is Google+. I've been using that for a couple of terms right now, and I find it really a simple way for them to come, and then they can do anything from, they can write their own post, share a video, they can comment on other people's stuff, they can click +1 and like something, and you know, as simple as that, or just read what other people have got, and it's mobile. It's that. I also use Twitter a little bit as well, but this is, and then of course their blog. So they have about 3 main different spaces where they interact with one another, and I tell them up front that you don't have to be proficient in all these things. You don't have to use them all. Find the place and space that works for you, and do that, because there is lots of activity. And again, in the same way, thinking of your classroom situation and students, and is there only one way for them to contribute and interact? Is the only way for them to is raise their hands, you know, or wherever they submit it. Separate accounts for classrooms. So separate, specifically what accounts are we talking about, Andrew? You mean for Google Plus, or? I don't, but the nice thing with Google Plus is you can create a community, and so that community is kind of restricted. nobody else can join it. In this case, you have to invite members. But I haven't created a separate account for myself. It just, for me, I don't use Google Plus an awful lot. I don't, and even if I did, I suppose you could. It doesn't matter, I guess. But I really like the idea that you can create communities inside Google Plus, and that's been the reason why I've gone that route, because it is sort of a private community. So that means that we can, there's a little bit more freedom, I guess, for them to share, if you will, and ask the questions they want to ask. But again, that's I want them to have a lot of different ways to do it. The one thing that I think we have to do a better job of is looking at the affordances of technology. And typically, most of us have done all of our learning through text, through printed word. That's what we read, we write. That's been arguably the dominant way in which we've learned. And now we have this opportunity to use video in many ways and connect with one another. And so even when you think about things like, kids would do an About Me thing at the beginning of the year, and they write about who they are and what they like, and that's fine, that's great, I'm glad they do it. But again, why not do it in a different way? And for me, this was really powerful to get my students, all my students at the beginning of the year have to create a 1-minute video telling me about themselves. And so some of them are pretty straightforward, others of them are kind of clever. Like this one's kind of interesting, so let me share this one with you from Kristen last semester. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here if I can. All right, so you get the idea. Exactly, that's the idea, that you get to see these people as people. These are the people you're going to be interacting with, and no, they don't have to become your friends. This is not but this is about getting to know someone. And if you really are going to be intentional about learning with other people, you need to know a little bit about them. And at the same time, this sets a different tone. It gets people to relax. It gets people to know that we're just here. We're just people coming together to learn. And yes, some students are more reluctant than others, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with the fact that some are not as comfortable in that vein. But at the same time, what I'm trying so hard to avoid is this notion of an isolated learning experience, that I just want to learn by myself. I don't want to get to know anybody else, because I think if you do that, if you allow that to happen in too strong a way, they are robbed of an opportunity of learning from each other, and are probably robbing people from learning from them. And I think that's a really important idea that I think tries to share. And video, again, a great way for them to, and even in a face-to-face setting, maybe there's a way for students to talk about where they live. And I know some people might not want to show where they live more specifically, or whatever it may be, but showing something that they're interested in. So maybe if it's younger students saying, here's me making my, I play with Lego. I don't know what it is. Like, what thing could they share? And gives you this really rich insight into who they are as people. I also do something with video as well, where I use an app called SocialCam to provide little updates to my students. And again, because we don't meet face-to-face, I'm all over doing the work that I do, but I like to quickly, if I can, take a minute or two just to talk about, just to sort of do my own reflections perhaps on classes that we've had, and so forth. So let me give you, I'll just play a little quick little example here of what I mean. Let me find one here that was recent. All right, so this is what I might do. So again, it's just really quick, grab the camera, grab the app, and just start talking. So again, a quick way for me to just do quick updates for them, and it doesn't take me long, and yes, it's full of mistakes, and you can see there it was probably breathing more difficult than I have, but it was fast. First of all, it's fast for me. It takes no time to do it. I grab a camera, press play, and it's just me sharing, here's what I've observed in the class, a general kind of overview of what's going on, so they know, first of all, that their instructor is interested in what they're doing, and a couple ideas for them to keep in mind. So I try to do that regularly on an ongoing basis. So again, as opposed to, I could send them an email, I could do that, but I don't think that does as much to connect people as using video. I'd also argue that audio trumps text as well. So here's another great thing that I came across a couple years ago that I've been using now pretty extensively with my students for providing feedback. So my students will usually at the beginning or in the middle, they'll do a midterm assessment of themselves. And so this isn't a formal paper or anything like that. It's just actually voluntary. And I normally get about 90% of my students doing it. So I said, listen, if you want some specific feedback from me that you might not be getting through, commenting on blogs or whatever, you're wanting to, have me take a little deeper look at it, send me a note, and it could be a note, but they could also send a video, they could also send audio that basically answers 3 questions. What's going well? What are you proud of? What are you getting? What's working for you? What are you struggling with a little bit? What doesn't quite make sense for you? What do you need to do? And thirdly, what is it that I can do to help you with that? And so they'll send that to me, and they'll send that to my Evernote account. And if you're not familiar with Evernote, it's just Evernote uses the icon of an elephant, because the idea is to remember everything, and I use it pretty extensively in all the things that in all sort of my own personal note-taking tools. So unlike Google Docs, which really is about collaborating, I think that's what makes Google Docs so awesome, is that you can share these documents. This isn't stuff I can share, but that's not typically what I do. It's my own sort of personal note-taking tool. But what I like about this is they send it to me, so I'll get this. This will be what I'll get from them. And then you see on the bottom there, I click a little button that just allows me to send audio feedback. So that's why I like it. So as opposed to them sending it to my regular email account, the reason I like it to go to Evernote is because I just click a button, and I love the fact that it's mobile, that I can go on my phone and I can take my dogs for a walk, and I can press that record button and give feedback to Christina or whomever else has sent me this, and then I email it right back to them, and they get this little audio recording. And to a person, they all say, oh, this was such a surprise. It felt like we were having a conversation, which is exactly what assessment should be. Assessment is a conversation, not a spreadsheet, as Joe Bauer says, and that's what I want them to be. Yeah, and it's, again, it's barking dogs, it's the train going by, it's me umming and ahhing. It is not a perfect, because if you're like me, you know that when you're writing feedback, it takes me anyways forever and a day to write something, and I rewrite something because I say, that's not the way I want it to sound. They're going to think this, they might think this, and so you rewrite things and you fuss and fiddle wordsmithing so that you're trying to capture the great tone. Instead, it makes much more sense just to speak it. So this is just one of these classic examples where I believe audio trumps text and builds a stronger relationship with your students. A big idea that I think is changing is the way in which we connect our students to things beyond the classroom. And as Will Richardson says, and I use this quote fairly often, is that we need to reconsider our roles in our students' lives, to think of ourselves as connectors first and content experts second. And that is a shift, because most of us, when we go into teaching, we're there because we are the biology teacher or we are the reading instructor. We have this level of expertise. And not that that's not important anymore, but what about this added layer of connecting? And what I argue is you're there for a short period of time in your students' lives. And while you can give them skills, and you ought to be giving them skills and opportunity to learn things for their future, what about connecting them to people who they can continue to learn with beyond that class? That's something I don't think most of us have thought about of late, is how do I connect them to people? I've often been, I call myself and I call Alec Koros as well, the lazy professors. Here's Al. This is Al, supposed to be Alec's course, and yet here I am teaching. But in the same way, I don't do much instruction in my class. I get people like this to come and speak to my students and share their perspective. And part of that, I mean, well, it's always great to have other people's voices, but part of it is all of the people that I ask to speak are all of a very giving nature and who are willing to connect with these students well beyond the scope of the classroom. So using tools like Twitter in particular, I said, listen, you know, if you want to talk to Shelley Terrell or George Koros, Alan Levine, or Hall Davidson, any of these people, just ask them. Like, you don't, when the course is done, that doesn't mean, oh, I guess I don't get access to them. I mean, they have access to me, is what I say, as long as they want. I mean, I'm happy to stay in connection with them, and I have a whole list of blogs of my former students that I love when they begin posting again. As I say to them, I am a lifetime subscriber to your blog. So, and many teachers have that attitude, that you'll always be their teacher if they want. But I want them to just be more than me. So that's why I connect them with those kinds of people. And I also want them to build the idea of a network. And so one of the things that I do specifically with my students, they're all pre-service teachers, is I connect them with other educators around the world who in this case are using technology well. And so I wonder about the students that you teach. Who are you connecting them to that they can learn with and share? Like, there are people everywhere that they can connect with. And so my students connect with, you know, other educators in Australia or wherever they are, and they comment on their students' blogs. They might Skype in. They might get to practice what it is that they're learning, get to showcase something they understand with them. But more than anything, just connecting with another educator who's sort of a bit farther along the journey in using technology in their classroom. I apologize for this slide; it kind of got mucked up, but this was to really illustrate, I think, another transformation in the way we think about ourselves as educators. And we all know that you know, we want to move from sage on the stage to guide on the side, and that's been sort of, you know, we've heard that mantra for a long time. It's not sage on the stage, but it's guide on the side. But Michael Fullen actually wrote an article that said that's not good enough anymore. Just being guide on the side doesn't capture what it is that we want to be as educators, and he uses the phrase meddler in the middle, which I love, because it talks about teacher as learner and letting your students know really clearly that you are with them as part of this learning community, not as this guide who knows everything and will occasionally step in to direct and facilitate learning, but they're actually in the middle trying to figure this out together. What are we trying to solve here? And that can be difficult when you're teaching, you know, particularly if you're teaching young people or a subject area you're very familiar with. But I mean, I try really hard in as many situations as I can to be in the middle with them, to say, yeah, I don't quite understand how this is all going to work, and we'll work together at trying to figure this out. So meddler in the middle is a phrase I love to explore, and part of that is the way in which we play together and work together. And you know, this is just a screenshot of one of my classes last year where we were in the middle of using Blackboard in the exact same platform, and we're talking about Google Hangout, and the students had never seen it, so we just quickly hopped over to Google Hangout and started to play, and they wanted to know how does this work and what does that do. And I think, again, the notion of play can come into context a lot of times, but it's that idea. I think play really affords the idea of, hey, we don't know how this is all going to work, so let's go in there together and explore something together. So I think thinking of opportunities where you as a class can explore something new together is a really, really important idea. And celebrating that by playing, by being together as well. And again, this is another little project I did last year when, as I said, I have my students connected with other classrooms around the world. but that's still sort of in an isolated experience. So there's, there might be a student that's working with a classroom in Wisconsin, and there's another one in Saskatchewan and another one in Australia, but they don't really interact much. So this was an effort, an attempt to bring those together. And so this was actually the time when Commander Hatfield was orbiting in space and had written a song with Ed Robertson of the Bare Naked Ladies called "Is Somebody Singing?" And so we did a quick lip sync to that song, and I'll just play you a few seconds of it so you get the sense of what we did together. So again, you get the idea. I mean, I think the idea of a lift up, I just really think that every school classroom should do a lift up. They're so fun to do, and they really do bring people together. In this case, it was bringing people together from, around the world. So they just created their little snippet. They just emailed it to me. I stitched it together, and we do it again. What is thinking of things that actually build this thing of doing something together? It's hard to do, right? I mean, it's hard to. Yeah, like last year, I know Alec did the same thing, and I think it just brings people together. And what I like about it is it's a small contribution that everybody can make, and yet it's a really tangible way of taking those small pieces, putting them together, and say, hey, look at what we made together. This is kind of awesome. That's really important to do. And again, it's about that intentionality of bringing that together. On the onset, though, you have to have this expectation of community. I don't think it's going to happen. It can happen, but I just don't know how it will unless you're intentional, unless you are talking about what the expectation is in this classroom. And this quote by Mark Prensky, I think, is somewhat contentious, but there's some truth here, right? The class size only matters if the teacher does everything. And that's very difficult for a lot of my students and probably a lot of yours to get away from, because they see you as the expert. And so they direct all of their questions to you. They expect you to find all the answers. They expect you to do the bulk of the work. And if we can start figuring out how to redistribute this and see everybody as a community and everybody making contributions, I think that changes, and I think it's an extremely freeing idea for an educator not to have the burden of all of that responsibility on them. So there's two questions that I share with my students at the beginning of every term, and I say every classroom from kindergarten to whatever should have these two questions. If indeed you believe in the notion of community as in a classroom, that these two questions are what you got to have, is what did you learn from others and what did you contribute? So there's an expectation that you're paying attention to those around you and that you have opportunity to learn from the person sitting across from you, the person on the other side of them, wherever, that you can learn from. And so at the end of my semester, they have to write about a 500-word essay talking about and providing examples of people they learn from. And then also not just about what they've learned, but also what they've contributed. And this is sometimes a more complex question, because a lot of students don't think they have anything to contribute, and they think they're at a disadvantage. Particularly if they're taking a course, they say, well, listen, the reason I'm taking this course on technology and education is because I don't know anything. How can I possibly make a contribution? But my argument to them is that as you're learning, you're making contributions about new things you're learning, new things you're discovering, and sharing them in a way that I probably don't always articulate. As well, asking a really good question about how to do something is one of the simplest ways to do it. So on our Google Plus community, I've told them that's the place to ask questions. Don't email me. If you've got a question, I have students do this. They'll email me and say, I'm not sure how to do X, Y, or Z, or I'm not sure about this. And unless that question is of a personal nature, do not email me any questions. Post it there, because now you're giving an opportunity not only for someone else to answer that question and show something that they know, but at the same time, you're also acknowledging the fact that there's probably 3 or 4 other people in the classroom who probably have the exact same question, just didn't ask it, were afraid to ask it, but you were brave enough to say, hey, I don't understand this. So I really think that those two questions are paramount to making sure that there's an expectation that you're going to be paying attention to the learners in the room, and that you're going to be thinking about how you make contributions. So, and then I'm really explicit about saying, hey, someone posted this video, someone shared this great video, thanks for doing that. That's a great example. Or I hear about, students that go out for coffee together and one helps another with something, or they phone someone or text someone. I don't care how you do it. I'm collecting all of these ways in which we can contribute learning, not just by raising your hand in class or whatever. But this, again, we take advantage of the wonderful affordances of technology to eliminate time and space from the equation and utilize these things to show things you maybe wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And again, I think it begs us to ask the question, what is it that school does that maybe we can't do other places? And if you look at something like Google Helpouts now, where you can go to Google Helpouts and look for instruction on virtually anything. If this is what school has been about, you as an expert teacher providing this stuff, well, they don't need you anymore to do that, because there are lots of people who are going to do that. So again, these are the kind of things that make me think maybe we need to think differently about school. Maybe school isn't just about being an expert and doing that. Maybe it is about this idea of helping people connect and find resources and find people, not only outside of their school building, but also within the classroom. And thinking about the way in which we take the affordances of technology, another quote by Will Richardson, who says, "It still shocks me to the extent to which we continue to dumb down the affordances of the web and technology for authentic learning in the service of keeping the system grinding no matter what the obstacles." We can do a lot of really, really powerful things. But it's about being intentional. It's about saying, what are the things that we want to try to do? And for me, this idea of social learning community remains kind of at the forefront of what our new roles have to be. And so I think this is a complex question. I don't know. I know I don't have all the answers, and I'm exploring them. But this is, to me, one of those mindsets, if you will, that our new teachers and our teachers have to adopt as we think about creating not just better schools, not just but different. And I think that's what we're seeing. There's something different about this, the affordances that we have. So again, thanks for your time. That's just a few ideas that I shared with you. And again, I have a couple answers, but I still continue to have more questions with you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with folks. And if you have a question or want to push back or shout out, I'm more than willing to hear from you. So I'll pause and see if folks do want to just. I see typing, so I'll just wait. There we go. Well, thank you. Yeah, and this is something I'm always tweaking as well, and so I really value the feedback. And I gotta say that I know not all students think this is wonderful. So I don't want to make it sound like all students think this is great. They don't. They struggle with it. Some of them just don't quite get it. But for the most part, it does seem to be working. I didn't even talk to you about my assessment practices, which are kind of unique in the way I, again, have students do almost exclusively self-assessment, which isn't completely related to the idea of social learning, but it is part of in shifting roles as well, but that's a different conversation. And to that point, what I don't do a lot of, which might surprise people, is I actually don't have them have to do a ton of collaborative work. They still sort of go on their own and do their own work, but they bring it back. There's always those opportunities to bring it back and get checked. So, and I think that's a whole other conversation about sort of forced collaboration and the idea of group work. And the idea, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think group work is fine. I think there are times where we should work together, and if I probably thought about it, I would probably try to create some opportunities where they could actually work together. But I But this isn't so much about collaboration in that kind of sense that we think of it. It is definitely more about community, which I think are different things. Yeah, and I would also argue or suggest that there's a difference between networks and communities. There's a lot of different definitions out there, but I would say, Aaron, that communities are essentially people that have very common purpose and are working fairly close together on sort of common things, whereas networks are people who may not have the same goals. You may be doing similar work, but in very different contexts. And there's also in networks no obligation to work to work and support with one another, which is kind of powerful in one sense, is that we do have these network connections, but they don't have any obligation to you. They can come and go as they please, whereas a community has a little bit more of a responsibility to one another. So the idea of community can be a little bit more of a safer enclosed place. There's a little bit more of that tendency to it, to be a more enclosed place, whereas networks tend to be open. And that's not about saying one's better than the other. I think we need both. I think we need community, and I think we need networks. And I see classrooms definitely as a more community model, but there's an opportunity within that community to introduce them to the concept of networks as well. Well, we don't need to take any more of your time. In the same way that I've always said, all of my guests that I bring in are committed to stay connected. I am as well. So if that's something that you want to do, you can connect me. Shareski is how you pronounce it. Some people call it Shareski. I'm fine with either. And Dean, there we go, is how we say the first name. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and your attention this afternoon, this evening, or whatever time it is for you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dean. And yeah, have a good night, everyone. We'll see you.